Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlot Banter. I'm your boy Abram, joined as usual for this series, but not as usual as maybe the series should be. I'm joined by Andrew, and we are here for yet another episode of my Star Wars show. And this is a special one for a couple of reasons. First reason is because, well, this was supposed to be like releasing 2 weeks after the Ahsoka review, but I think we uploaded the Ahsoka review about 2 months ago, so... My Star Wars show will always exist in limbo, but when it returns, it'll always be for a seismic topic. And nothing can be more seismic, Andrew, in the land of Star Wars than what we're talking about today, which is Star Wars, period. 1977's Star Wars, as people know it these days. Star Wars, Episode 4, New Hope. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you, Andrew, because this is obviously a film we have both seen countless times. But now we're going to sit down, go a little bit into analysis mode, share some stories. I'd like to hear about maybe some personal memories you have of the film and everything, but we're really just we're going to attack it. We're going to get very, very deep in, which is going to be really cool. But before we do, if you want to talk to us about Star Wars, join our Discord server. Link as usual, top of the description or down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, leave a comment letting us know what you think of A New Hope. And I just want to note, if you join the Discord and you ask me for a role in the Discord server, I'll give it to you. I just gave, Andrew, what did I just give you? What are you now? The BLB anti-hero, I think?
Yeah.
That's what it was. Yeah.
I mean, if Daniel Navaroli gets to be the villain, I'm like, I want to be the anti-hero. I want to have the option to be. I want to exist in that gray area where I can just be whatever I want.
Yeah, and you can be the anti-hero, but you can also be Andrew, as you always are, the guest of honor here, and you can start us off with your thoughts on A New Hope. But here's where I want to start. I want to start with your thoughts on this film as they've evolved over time. Really what I'm curious to know is when did you first see this? What was that context like? And then kind of take me from there to now and how your thoughts have changed or your appreciation has deepened, however you really want to attack that. But I'm curious where you first saw this film.
I remember watching A New Hope. I remember exactly where I was. We were in our apartment when I was like, it's hard to remember the exact age, but I remember I lived in this particular apartment between the ages of 4 and 7. And I remember my dad had the THX, the cassette collection. They just at that time it was newly released with the improved audio and all that. So it was, I'm sure you've probably seen it, the little trilogy cassette tapes of the VHS. Not the original ones with the Fox logo. Not the original ones with like the CBS logo from like the 80s, but it was that 20th Century Fox collection with the profile for Darth Vader for A New Hope. And I think it was like a Stormtrooper for Empire Strikes Back, and it has Yoda for Return of the Jedi. And I remember my dad just popping them in like one evening, like after school, or I don't even know if I was in school yet, but I remember it was like around the evening because we turned off the lights and stuff. And I remember the freaking Star Destroyer looming over, coming over in those opening credits. I remember the opening credits being weird. The crawl, I had never seen that before. Like I used to watch a lot of TV even as a kid. My earliest memories are of television, like Power Rangers and stuff. But I have never seen TV where like the credits just come out. That's usually that's like when it's over, right? That's like a thing when it shows up at the end. So I remember just being like that, like what? Like what? This is weird. I mean, I couldn't have complicated thoughts other than just like that's out of the ordinary, right?
Sure.
And I just remember just little bits here and there. The things that really stuck out to me were just the stark tan desert of Tatooine. I just remember that being a big part. And then like I have blurry memory. I don't remember much after that. I remember the lightsaber duel between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. And then at the end, I just remember basically whenever the scenery changes dramatically. So like the forest moon of Yavin. Like those are the things I remember just because they take up so much of the screen, that change of color. But like the individual things, like I don't have memories of like the trash compactor. I don't have memories of like the interior of the Death Star. I don't really remember other than the duel. So like those are like my earliest reaching back like Star Wars memories are just when there was a sudden scene. The first time we see Tatooine, the duel and like the lush green of like the little bits of Yavin.
Yeah.
So just whenever that kind of happens, those are my earliest memories, really. And then I have more memories of the other movies actually stand out more. The rest of the trilogy stands out more in my mind, but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I hold on. Paul is now trying to. Goodbye. Let's put a little cut there. He's like circling around my chair the whole time I'm trying to start, and then he's trying to like meow me and paw at me. But
actually, hold on. One of the other memories I do have, and I remember this because I used to imagine it, or I used to recreate it when I was a kid playing the Death Star trench run.
Sure.
That I have a very vivid memory of that because I remember when I was a kid, my mom and I would go to the grocery store, and whenever I would get the cart, I would pretend, and the aisles of the store, I would pretend I was doing the Death Star trench run with the cart going down the aisles really fast, and my mom would get pissed at me to tell me like, don't run down the aisles and stuff. But like in my mind, you know how they come in at an angle, right?
Yeah.
They go in, and there's like that little like wobble adjust to go straight, right? Like I would do that as like a kid, like in the grocery store. I'd go down the aisles with the cart, wobble it, and then just go straight down. So that is a key memory I have.
I'm trying to think back because my earliest memories of this film are a little bit hazy. I remember getting it. I don't remember specifically the first time I watched it because, to the best of my memory, I was introduced to Star Wars through some Star Wars toys that came into my possession somehow. And I remember like asking my parents, it was a Kenner Darth Vader, not one of the originals, but one's a little bit later, like Powers of the Force era. Mm-hmm. I don't know where it came from. It probably, thrift store, you get like a bunch of figures, they put them in like a plastic bag or whatever, So I remember finding him quite compelling, and then there's this period of time where I was then aware of what Star Wars was, but I wasn't really, you wouldn't say a Star Wars fan. But I got just a little bit older, and I'm still quite young at this point in time. My like the exact linear chain of events is a little bit odd because I remember getting Revenge of the Sith around like Easter time on DVD. And that DVD probably came out, that must have been 2006, obviously, because the film was out in 2005. Yeah. But I believe by that point I had seen the original trilogy.
Okay.
And because I had the original trilogy on DVD, and I'd have
was it like the golden like set with the
three. It was a box set. Yeah, it was a box set with the three of them. And I remember my dad getting that for me from Best Buy, and I remember going with him. But it's also strange, and the reason this whole like timeline is jumbled in my head is because I got the box set of the original trilogy, and I also got Ratatouille on PS2.
Okay.
Now, Ratatouille came out, I believe, in 2007 or 2008.
That sounds about right. So I remember, I was in high school, senior, yeah.
So something about the timeline doesn't quite work, because that would have been after Revenge of the Sith if I'd gotten that around Easter at the time of the original release of the DVD. So there's this whole period of time, probably circa 2005 to 2009, when I might have seen A New Hope for the first time. What I know for a fact is that at some point in my life, when you die, right before you die, they tell you any facts you want to know about your life, I can find out in what order did I receive the DVD for Revenge of the Sith and the box set of the original trilogy, because both those things happened.
Okay. I don't know if this is helpful for you, Abram, but I have the PS2 release of Ratatouille in North America as June 26, 2007.
Okay, interesting. We're getting narrower. We're narrowing in the window somewhat. It says that we're going down the trench towards the exhaust port of the Death Star, and we're, like the distance is ticking down on the little viewfinder, which I love, and we'll get to. But this is a lot of waffling for the point of I don't really remember watching this movie for the first time.
Okay.
I remember getting that box set again sometime between 2007 or sometime between 2005 and 2007. I don't know exactly when it was. I've got these hazy memories of that Darth Vader figure, of that Revenge of the Sith DVD, of this OT box set, of this R2-D2 plug and play little console for the TV. I've got all of these little memories.
Okay.
The importance of them and what I want to convey about A New Hope as we talk about it is it's hard for me to remember first seeing this film because it's just always been a part of my life. It's like asking people to recollect about what's your earliest memory of being alive. Because for me, I have just basically, as long as my memory has functioned, Star Wars has been in my life. And so when I think about, and this is sort of a notion I believe I've brought up in other episodes, but when I think about A New Hope, I'm very seldom looking at it through the lens of film, which I know sounds very odd, but I'm not assessing it the way I would assess most other films. I'm not thinking about the acting and the cinematography and the blocking and the editing and everything, because to me this is just a story. It's just this cornerstone story in my life that transcends it just being a 2-hour film. This is just a thing. It just happened. In the mythos of my life, this is a real event.
It's like the Big Bang, right? It's like it's always been there.
It's always been there. And so that makes it so much fun to revisit, as I have revisited the film many, many times that I can actually remember clearly. But I don't even really feel like I gain anything new out of watching it because I just know everything. It's just obvious. I know the dialogue is going to happen. I know how the scenes are going to play out. Nothing's going to surprise me, except for the fact that the cut of A New Hope that is on Disney Plus is different than the cut that is on the DVDs. So that's something we can talk about. Yeah. But
was it Spelunky or
McClunky?
There you go.
McClunky. And then he gets killed. I love that. But this is why I'm really excited to unpack the film with you, Andrew, because it's just always, those first 6 films have just always been with me ever since I was a kid. So where do you want to really, actually, you know what? I'm not gonna give you control yet, because
okay.
I'd asked you a question before we started recording, and I decided let's just talk about it in the episode because it's fascinating. You showed your wife this film for the first time. She'd never seen it.
Yeah, we saw it last night. Yeah, first time.
In 2020, right before the release of Cyberpunk 2077, because that's the only thing I was thinking about at that time, I showed Jean Star Wars for the first time also.
Really?
Okay. She'd never seen it before. And so you were telling me a little bit.
I feel like my wife's not as much of an anomaly now. Okay, I feel better now.
And you were talking about like touchstones for her, about, you know, knowing characters from various places or whatever, but what was that like? Did that change your viewing experience at all, do you think, having this be her first look at Star Wars?
Yeah, a little bit. Something I never realized until watching it again for the umpteenth time this time was that there's a lot of early on, there's a lot of sections where there's just no dialogue, and I never really consciously thought about it until we just see like C-3PO just wandering through the desert on his own, and then R2 going down that like canyon on his own, and then when they get picked up, and it's just like the whatever the Jawas are saying, and like there is no like really spoken dialogue. Yeah. And I wasn't aware of that until I was watching it with her, and I was like, oh, okay, no one's saying anything. Like, is she getting? I would turn to her, look at. She's like, she's still paying attention. I'm like, like without dialogue, I feel like people kind of get bored with certain things, and I was like, I never noticed just how quiet it is until we get back to the human characters with Luke and Owen again. Right. And so I thought that kind of stuck out to me, but there was a couple of things. There were certain comments she made where I was like, I didn't think about it that way, and also things were like, okay, everybody gets that thing. Like, one of my favorite things was she's like, why is the fat guy named Porkins? And I was like, I don't know. He's the only chubby guy in the whole movie, and they give him like a chubby name. I don't know. But also, it's just like when like when the stormtroopers invade the Tantive 4 and they come out, and she's like, oh, those are the characters we see walking around Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland. I'm like, yep, like that's them. And she, for some reason in her head, she thought they were like robots. But when
Sure.
she sees the scene where Luke rescues Leia from the cell block and like he takes off his helmet. I'm like, and I turn to her, I'm like, you see, like they're not robots, it's just armor. She's like, oh, okay. And then she would ask about Darth Vader, and she's like she has this thing. My wife has she has like this kind of like audio thing with like she doesn't like ASMR or stuff like that.
Sure.
She could not stand Darth Vader's breathing.
Yeah.
It would just she says she would get like goosebumps, like it just made her feel uncomfortable. And I'm like, that's something that's just always I just never thought about, because that's just how Darth Vader has always been since I was like 5 years old.
Yeah.
And kind of thinking like for someone who has no context, no has real context of Star Wars, like Darth Vader does. She seems like she said like he's like kind of like he's very intimidating. And then the first time she's ever seen the Force is when he does the Force choke on one of the little Imperial delegates, and she's like, what's he do? Like, oh my god, what is he doing? And she's like, he's really powerful, huh? I'm like, yeah, Darth Vader's powerful. And it's like she says so many things where I'm like we're not there yet. Like she's still like she's not paying attention. She's somewhere else in the house right now. But she's like, oh, like Luke and Leia are gonna end up together, huh? I'm like, let's keep watching. Let's keep watching. So it's just kind of like
it is. That is so interesting, because on this viewing I watched with my dad. By the way, shout out to my dad, the #1 fan of my Star Wars show.
Awesome.
And I would always just like peek over at him really quick just to, because and he's gonna he's gonna learn this about himself for the first time when he watches this episode. My dad is very expressive when he watches movies. So I love to just like peek over.
That's fun. That's fun. Yeah.
and see how big he's smiling or what his reaction is at various moments. And it made me reflect on a couple things. And why I was so curious to hear what your wife thought about the film is that this is such a timeless film. Mm-hmm. It is and it is timeless for a very specific reason that a subsect of the fandom will refuse to acknowledge. And I want to talk about this off the bat.
Okay.
I'm a believer in the special editions.
Okay.
Now, again, to clarify, I have never seen Star Wars and had it not be the special edition. I've never seen a non-special edition cut of the film. Okay. Because obviously George has done his best to erase that from existence. And I know I could go watch like the what's they call it, the despecialized or the like that fan 77 cut or whatever it is, which is really cool. But I was having a conversation with my dad a while ago about Terminator, and we put on the trailer for Terminator because my dad he's like, how does this hold up? And it looks like, and I mean it looks of its age, of course. And I love film, and I can tune the frequency right in my head back and see a film like Terminator for the time, right? Mm-hmm. But I think part of the reason that Star Wars has remained so culturally timeless is because George Lucas had the foresight and the ego, let's be clear, to say, hey, look, I need to update this film, partially for my own edification, partially because I've got ILM set up and we're at the cutting edge of CGI. I want to put that back in my movies. I want to market this with Phantom, I want to do all this stuff. But I think the fact that you can watch Star Wars today and it's got the sort of guardrails of the special edition, it is just accessible to all viewers. It is not aged. And you can say what you want with the changes, but I think that the special editions are essential to the legacy of Star Wars, the continual ability to reinvent the legacy. So I'm curious, Andrew, just off the top, as we keep beating around the bush of the actual substance of the film, what do you make of the special editions? Are you a anti-special editions type of guy?
So I've seen, just like you, I've never seen the original cut.
Yeah.
I've seen versions of the VHS set where at the end of Return of the Jedi, like Anakin is still, what's his name, Shaw. I can't remember the actor's name, but it's not Hayden Christensen yet, obviously, right? Back in 1997 or whatever.
Yeah.
So and that's the version I remember. But the one I'm most familiar with is the one that you are with, and that's like the DVD ones from 2005, 2004, whatever that was, where they did have the foresight to change it to Hayden Christensen, and that's the version where we get for example, we get that whole. The extra singing segment in Return of the Jedi with
size noodles.
And all that, like that. That's the version I'm familiar with. But I also remember when it wasn't that. I remember the first time I saw that slice noodles, like the extra singing. And I was like, what? It was very jarring. But then I've just gotten used to that version now. But the one I'm most familiar with is still the DVD version. Like this one kind of threw me off, like with the whole McClunky thing, because it just sounded so weird, because it sounds like he says it after he dies or something. So it was just, and then I'm used to seeing Han doing that shift, that weird, awkward, edited shift. Yeah. And I don't think it's shown in this version on Disney Plus, like the quick, weird, awkward dodge and shot and everything. It was like I was expecting that. So like there's like, instead I think just a flash or an explosion or a puff, and I was like that's not how I remember that going. And like, so like I'm as far as I've known, like for example, like I know the dewbacks were not in the original, but the dewbacks have been present since like the VHS set, which I grew up with. So like the dewbacks are, I know there's some people who take like umbrage with the dewbacks, but I'm like, no, like for me that is always been original, so to speak, because I've known it since that was my first viewing, with the dewbacks and the with the pauldrons, the orange pauldrons on the stormtroopers in the desert and stuff. So like that for me is original, even though it's not. It is for me, so I'm used to that version.
Yeah, it's it kind of goes back to what I was saying about, to me, Star Wars transcends just being a film, and the production context of Star Wars alone is fascinating. But Star Wars is more than a quasi indie project from like a young filmmaker in George Lucas. It's so much more than that now, and I think that when I watch back A New Hope, as A New Hope, again, that's an important detail. It was Star Wars in 1977, and now it's A New Hope. Mm-hmm. The function of the special edition, in my mind, is not just to grandstand with the CGI, but it is to make this a fourth chapter and make it understandable to everybody of all ages of the fandom. I mean, it is a peculiar patchwork. There's no doubt about it, because the most obvious moment is when Jabba talks to Han.
Oh yeah.
Original.
That wasn't used. Yeah. I mean, that still kind of throws me off sometimes, because like I seen the version where that scene doesn't even happen, and I've also seen, I don't know if it was in the cassette, but I've seen somewhere where it's a human, it's just a chunky human,
right?
Instead,
and it's interesting because obviously, since Jabba was once just a guy. The line that Han says of Jabba, "You're a wonderful human being," used to be literal.
Yeah.
Because he was a human being. And then George Lucas said, hey, well, we've established Jabba to not just be a dude. So I need to put the actual big Hutt, Jabba the Hutt, in this frame. And then I just have to hope that the audience takes Han's remark about him being a wonderful human being as a joke. Yeah. And it's things like that are both very interesting, because they show this, it's almost like patch notes for a game, but unfolding in front of you on your TV of like, oh, they patched that, quote unquote. But I think things like that are essential. I think that the fact that Luke and Obi-Wan use blue lightsabers is essential, and Vader's is red. I mean, they were colorless in the original cuts of the film. The Kenner toys all had these weird, like, yellow, like, glow stick looking sabers. Uh-huh. So I was really reflecting on that on my most recent viewing. This notion that A New Hope went from being this pioneering piece of 70s filmmaking that is essential to the progression of film in its approach to transmedia storytelling, and how novel it was, and how it totally reinvented the sci-fi genre on the aesthetic level. I mean, it is one of the most important films ever. But it feels like it's even transcended that to this place where George has taken it to, and all the people who helped make the special editions took it to, of in some ways humbling that achievement and just making it a big, loud CGI laden blockbuster, but also now like a piece of this much larger universe. So I found that really interesting. And I also found, to your wife's point about, oh, I bet Luke and Leia get together, it is so obvious when you start to really pay attention to it that clearly George Lucas was writing this having no fucking clue what he was going to do in the upcoming films. There's so many examples of this, and it's because it's something you put in my head of try to pay attention to how Rogue One and Ahsoka kind of complicate the plot of A New Hope. But I also was just thinking to myself, and I want to hear your thoughts on this idea that George Lucas already made it hard for himself. The Force is so oddly defined, barely defined in its function in this film. The relationship between Luke and Leia is so obviously sexual that you cannot make any good faith of reading into George Lucas knowing when he was writing this film in the early 70s that they're going to be brother and sister in the 80s. I promise you, he had no clue. So what do you make of all this?
So real quick, because I wanted to say this earlier, but I didn't know where to jump in. I asked my wife at the end of the movie, I was like, how did you like it? And she said it didn't seem as old as I thought it was. And I was like, when do you think this movie was made, just judging by it? And she's like, it looks like late 80s, early 90s. And I was like, huh. And she's like, well, I'm like, it's 1977. And she's like, oh, like it looks like everything looks like style wise, or like she didn't say CGI, but she said like a lot of like the scenes kind of just made it seem like it was like early 90s or late 80s. And I was like, so when you were talking about the timelessness, I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the midpoint sort of in a way, where like the the extra added CGI scenes kind of help balance out the older looking special effects and stuff. And I asked her like what was the thing that looked like the oldest to you? And she said like the only way I can tell like it's really old, she says, is the haircuts, the hairstyles. Like Luke's hairstyle, like Han's style, they look very like Brady Bunch-esque. And she says that's the only reason I could tell like this is like a much older movie than what it really looks like. And I was like, okay, like I found that interesting. Cause, my wife pays a lot of attention to like styles and makeup and stuff like that. So she's like, the hair is clearly like out of place, like in terms of like 90s and 80s, like that wouldn't be in vogue anymore. So
I can't remember which one has it, but it's either Wedge or Biggs has that big like porno mustache. And I'm like, that's very 70s also.
That's Biggs, yeah, Biggs. Real quick, what was your question again? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. What do you make of this idea that clearly so much of this was happening on the fly? So much he was writing he was like putting down the tracks right in front of the train, it feels like, when you're watching this movie.
Yeah, well, again, watching that stuff, like for me, it was kind of like whatever, but seeing it through her eyes, where she assumes that like Luke and Leia are, they're coded to be like the the romantic couple, and then she's thinking like, oh, like they're gonna be together, and I'm just like thinking in my head like, no, they're siblings, but I don't want to ruin that for her yet.
Yeah.
And just like she's talking about like the Force, because like when they mention the Force, she's like, oh, may the she's like that's what they call it, right? Like the day, right? May the 4th, like May the Force. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, yep, that's where that comes from. Yeah. And so it's just like all these seeing like these things from her point of view, and she's talking about like it's cool seeing it through her eyes. It's very refreshing, because she's like oh, so like Luke's dad, he was a Jedi, and he was also good friends with this Obi guy, right? I'm like yeah, that's not, she doesn't know like Darth Vader and all that stuff, but like she's just like going along. It's almost like someone who's only ever it is literally someone who's only ever seen that one movie. And so going through all that, but like kind of seeing it through her eyes again, like for me was kind of like yeah, like a lot of this is kind of being built in the plane's being built in the air, so to speak, and like just because she's thinking like, oh, like at the end when they blow up like the Death Star, she's like wow, like that, like she's like that thing was huge. I was like, and she's thinking, and I'm just thinking in my head like, oh, she doesn't know like there's going to be a lot of these throughout the movies. Like she doesn't know a second one, and then Star Killer Bays and all this stuff. She's thinking like, she was saying like, oh, like something can destroy a planet. Like when she saw like the Alderaan scene, like it doesn't obviously it looks very aged, but the implications like where she in the moment believes like, oh, like wow, like that's like she's like they destroyed her planet. I'm like, yeah, they destroyed her planet. And I'm just thinking in my head like, oh, they're gonna destroy way more planets later on. So it's very interesting seeing that through especially in 2023, like it's like there's not that many people left who haven't experienced Star Wars to some capacity. She's just never been into like sci-fi stuff. But like she picks up on things like she's heard the May the Force like from other media, right? So like things like that. But as for me, like I've always kind of just taken it as, like you said, that's just how it's been. Like the Force, it's created by all living things, and that's it. That is it. That is the vaguest explanation. Why can you do Force choke? Because the Force. Like, why? Like I did have to explain to her the mind trick because she didn't understand why the stormtrooper was just repeating the same thing. Yeah. Because the explanation and from when that happens is it's a couple of minutes apart. So I did have to kind of like pause and explain like, well, you know how he like did the choke thing? Well, like you can also kind of, if someone's like mentally weak, you can like influence them. She's like, okay, got it. Okay. But I did kind of require a little explanation just because it's, you kind of just run through that scene real quick. You don't really linger on it. It's like, so that, but like, the framework of like, this is the Force and like, what's the Force? Like, well, it's made by living things, and we'll expand on that in the future movies, which is really good. I think like it's cool. Like we set the most basic of rules, in this universe. Good is red lightsabers back. I'm sorry, good is blue, is any color other than red. Yeah. And we're gonna see that later on. The one thing she thought was weird, and I kind of, again, another thing I just accepted as always, is why did Obi-Wan, when he died, did he just fall flat? That kind of threw her off. And I'm like, at the time, and it's going to be retconned later, we thought all Jedi just, poofed when they died. And then this ends up being retconned later, the only specific Jedi. And I was like, you know what? We're going to get to that later on. I'll explain later. She's like, okay, all right. Because she's like, why did he just cut it? And he's just like, his cloak, and then she's like, he like Vader toes it with his foot like to make sure and stuff. And I'm just thinking in my head, I'm like, wait a minute, Vader has never seen this before. Like up until now, to him, all Jedi's, their bodies stay behind, but he's kind of just like nonchalant about it. And when it wasn't until she brought that up about him like falling, I'm like, oh yeah, this would be a new thing for Vader too, not just for my wife, but also for Vader. Like, you know what I mean? That's one of those things we kind of just blow past, and then later on, in the movies and stuff, they burn Qui-Gon's body, and I remember as a kid being like, why didn't he just poof like Obi-Wan, right? So it's like one of those things it has to get retconned and fixed later on that I really didn't pay attention to until she pointed it out to me.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about everything that had to be retconned and worked around, and these sort of like trying to fit Rogue One seamlessly against A New Hope. It's all very interesting. Again, retrospective work, the same way that there's a lot of retrospective work done on Star Wars to make it into A New Hope. But I always think about, and I really focused on this time, when Luke is in Obi-Wan's hovel and he's hearing about the Clone Wars and he's hearing about his father. It's so interesting that there was even just the concept of the Clone Wars. Now, obviously, at this point, it could mean anything.
Yeah.
But the fact that there is this implicit backstory to the universe, I think, is part of why it was so captivating immediately. Because what is the Clone Wars? What are they talking about? And you can maybe make an argument for the fact that maybe modern Star Wars is a little bit too preoccupied with trying to answer all these questions, when, part of I think the appeal of this film is that there is so much intentionally left unclear.
Yeah.
I think it is interesting, that kind of world building being done, but also to the point of, the Jedi mind trick scene, we move very quickly through this exposition about the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and the relationship between Anakin and Darth Vader, which is another thing that I don't actually think George had figured out in this film.
Yeah. Darth. Only a master of evil, Darth. Like if it's like part of his name rather than a title. Yeah.
It's interesting because obviously, to think about this just filmically a little bit, the notorious story about Star Wars is that the first cut of the movie was fucking awful. Mm-hmm. Like, notoriously, the movie was not good at all when George watched it. Yeah.
Yeah, until his wife got her hands on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it was in the editing room that the film came together. But I think you can actually see in a lot of ways that this was clearly a rushed edit, and it was a recovery edit. Because I even think about, at the end of the film, we cut back when the Death Star is getting ready to destroy Yavin 4. Tarkin is always telling us the time. How much time is there until we're in range?
Oh. Yeah.
The time here, and a general rule, if you say there's going to be a minute timer, you probably don't want 5-6 minutes of screen time between occupying that 1 minute of time. And it's like, there's a lot of very interesting cuts and sequences of shots and little things taken for granted of, hey, Luke, I need your help. We're getting attacked by TIE fighters. And Luke just runs right down to the gunner. He doesn't, how does he know? You know, it's a lot of like cinema, we would now refer to this as like CinemaSins nitpicking. But I think it's also interesting to kind of work backwards and be like, okay, why is it like this? Well, it's because, again, the film was coming in so hot. How come Luke gets given an X-Wing? Why do they let him in the X-Wing? Why is he doing any of this? It's ultimately because the film came together in the editing booth with no regard for these little inconsistencies or oddities. And I don't think it's to the detriment of the film. I just think it's to the intrigue of how Star Wars got made and how close we came to it not happening or being really bad.
Yeah.
And then George Lucas is known for American graffiti. There's a world where that's the case.
I know you said in the past that you don't really watch like anything Star Wars like parody or satire, but like some of the things you're bringing up, I'm just thinking of because like Family Guy does like they do like the whole Blue Harvest and they do like a whole series of parodies of this.
Sure.
And they address one of the things about like where not just about Luke also getting like an X-wing, even like they have no idea who he really is, and they just kind of give him an X-wing. But there's also that scene where he interrupts the briefing and he says like, "Oh, like it's not my, they're not much bigger than Womp Rats. I used to take them out of my T-16 back home." And then like the guy to the side and he's like why'd you do that? He's like, what? It's like why'd you interrupt the whole thing just for that? It's like you kill animals, like you just kill animals, like that's sick. You're sick. Like it's like they're taking apart the dialogue and it's like, oh yeah, that seems kind of weird. Like, and he's like, I live on a desert planet with 2 suns and no women. Like, what am I supposed to do? So he's just like, I guess that's I mean, just him like that comment about like, oh yeah, we used to just shoot animals just for fun. So like when you're talking about like that scene about giving him just the X-wing and stuff, like they kind of there's like satire and parodies that kind of nitpick and make fun, poke at stuff like that. And I guess it's just stuff that like you're saying, like when you're watching it, you don't really think too hard about it because it's just like yeah, like that's. I mean, the weirdest thing being here, like the Force is technically like the weirdest thing on paper, but everything, I think that just kind of makes everything else we just kind of gloss over because you can just hide away the answer anyways.
I also think it also just comes from, I feel, a general awe that surrounds this movie, because just from the top rope, George Lucas came out with Star Wars, right? Out of nowhere. I was watching an interesting documentary about the Kenner toys last night.
And is it Toys That Made Us?
It wasn't Toys That Made Us. It was just something I found on YouTube. It was just like a YouTube guy. And he had made this little documentary about all the Kenner figures. And he was talking about the history of them a little bit, of like, nobody wanted to make the toys. Nobody wanted that. It was Kenner, who had no repute. It made like the Easy Bake Oven, who came in and did the toys and then sold. The figure he gave was, he said 300 million toys sold, I believe, to the point where you could, like, if you put them end for end, they would wrap around the circumference of the planet 4 times.
Jesus Christ.
I'll actually link
That's a lot of plastic. That's a lot of plastic.
Yeah. I'll link this guy's video in the description because it's really interesting. I forget his name off the top of my head. I think his channel is called Carbon Scoring. I don't remember, but... and
the foresight that George had, right? Yeah. He had like he gave up something for like the distribution of the film in return for like the revenue from the merchandise, right? I think that's what it was.
Yeah, he took a pretty significant cut. I forget if it's upfront or like to be paid when the film was released in exchange for merchandising, and he got. I think about this sometimes. George Lucas is so fucking rich.
Yeah, he is.
He is so rich.
I love the pictures that you'll see every now and then where he's just out about doing normal things, and he's just kind of like, and it's like, yeah, like that's like one of the richest guys around. And he's just in a food court mall, just just doing his own thing, or like I think someone had a picture of him like at Disneyland back in 2011 or something like that. He was just milling around, just doing normal people things.
There's this like the very like a very niche series of memes online of like they're called like George Lucas cryptids, and it's just photos people take of like celebrity. It's usually like a celebrity paparazzi photo that George Lucas is just in the background of. Like, it's not a picture of him. They didn't take the picture because George is in the frame. They took it for somebody else, and he's just existing there. There's
like
a lot
Bigfoot
of
sighting.
Yeah, pretty much. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really love George Lucas, is that he's so confidently an individual, and he was so singularly creative in this film. Another scene I love is, of course, the cantina, when we enter the Mos Eisley cantina. And it's the ambiance, it's the music, which they have now retconned to be just called jazz, right?
Jizz.
It used to be jizz. It's not jizz anymore.
Really?
Yeah,
okay.
This is a recent, that's why I'm not sure about the name. It's very recent, as in last couple months of retcon, which I believe I saw plenty of memes of the ripping the calendar from January 2020 to like January 1984.
1984.
But the really interesting thing about the cantina is the number of aliens in there.
Mm-hmm.
He just they were in here and then they're on the screen. The creativity to craft this vignette, I think, is just outstanding. What do you think about that scene? Because it's obviously one of the most famous of the entire film.
Yeah, I it annoys me right now. I can't remember. My wife said something about it when she saw like those aliens where she thought the little bat getting the drink was very cute. The little short bat alien getting the drink. She thought it was very cute. But then she asked like about the bartender. Oh no, she asked about the guy who's like, he doesn't like you either. Like, I don't like. She's like, what happened? She's like, oh, what's up with his face? Like, she's like, he's not an alien. He looks like a normal person that just got like really disfigured. I'm like, I don't know. I was like, I'm sure there's a story there. Like, I don't know what his background is, but like, just like the thought of like where she was just thinking like what happened to him, and it's like Star Wars is that kind of like property, like where you ask like what's beyond like this thing's being presented to us, or like what's the origin of that, what's the background for that, like what could, and like your mind kind of just wanders around and like. And I mean, I'm sure there's like books and comics out there that answer all these questions and stuff. But like, she would look at the different alien, like she's like, oh, like the bat's really cute. And I'm like, oh yeah, like the bat's cute. And she's like, oh, that guy, like what happened to his face? And it's like, I don't know. And then it's like, and I'm thinking to my head, like, what did happen to that guy's face? I'm like, I'm sure there's a whole story there. But like, so like, I mean, I don't really have thoughts of the cantina from when I was a kid, but like, just seeing it again, and just I noticed this time it feels like we do linger longer on the different aliens before we actually get some dialogue again. Yeah, there's moments where Obi-Wan's just talking to Chewie. You can't even hear what they're saying. They're just at the bar talking, and like Luke's kind of just like looking around, and like I'm thinking like, oh, like that's right, like this is like the scum of the hive of scum and villainy, and like, you know, he's not even doing anything. He's really just there at the bar, and he manages to get in a fight, not doing anything at all. So I just thought that was really just funny again in retrospect. But I mean, I there's a lot you can see where, again, you talked about how this movie establishes so much. Like a lot of aliens we get the Thorians with the hammerhead shark looking dudes, right? Like there we get the I forget the species that Cad Bane is, but the blue guys with the red eyes, like in the background talking and stuff. We see there's like these two human women with really long like columns of hair, and there's actually a story about them in one of the books. Like I don't have the book with me, but there's like a background story. There's a I don't know if I told you about Abram, the book that's like, it's like a 40 stories or whatever thrown into like a, it's like about all these background characters in New Hope and stuff. It's really cool. But there's like a story about them. There's a story about basically everybody. But like you see this dude who has like, it looks like he has like these devil horns. He's like cackling in the corner or whatever. Like it's a really cool scene. And like I think the backstory was like these were all leftover props or whatever from like other movies, or like there's a really cool story. I'm sure you've seen the ILM documentary on Disney Plus, but like they kind of go into like how they basically were just ordered to just make as many different unique mask as possible, and that's kind of like what they did. There's that weird alien with the 4 eyes and the little tiny like tongue. You know what I'm talking about? The little like it's like it's like a little furry thing with like a little tongue. And in my mind I remember that from the micro series. Like he's like that one Jedi. Remember that one Jedi that survives or whatever? Is like with a little tongue that's out. So like it's cool like how he established like these are just random aliens, but these are aliens that are gonna have some kind of impact or expansion on later throughout the life of Star Wars. So it's really cool seeing like, oh yeah, that's like where that started from. The Gonk droid in the belly of the Jawa ship, the Gonk.
Yeah.
Gonk. Like there's our beloved Gonk droid right there, and just like and the different R2 units, how we established the like astromech droids, or even the red one's called R2 something, like they call it an R2 like unit or whatever. He's like Uncle Owen, his R2 unit's busted, and like okay, like that we're just standardizing all these like names and titles for all these things. Except for Darth Vader. Apparently that's just gonna be just a name for now, a title later on and stuff. But but yeah, back to back focus on the cantina. Just that we have the Bith, playing the cantina band, like the Bith aliens and stuff, and all these species that are gonna end up being expanded on and becoming much more than just a background piece later on in some kind of Star Wars media.
I can't imagine coming up with all of this, and that's another one of my core takeaways from this watch. I was thinking about so do you know who Max Landis is?
Yes. He's a comic book writer, right?
Yeah, he wrote Superman American Alien. It's probably his most famous comic, but he's also the writer of Bright, if you know Bright.
The Will Smith movie on Netflix.
Yeah,
right?
Will Smith, Netflix, kind of like orc goblins. It's like a thinly veiled. Yeah. It's like a thinly veiled racism allegory, pretty much.
Yeah,
and is what Bright is. Max Landis put out what is one of the funniest tweets to ever. He's one of the best posters to ever do it. He tweeted when he's working on Bright, it's something to the effect of, I think my next project is my Star Wars, and it feels fucking amazing. And then obviously Bright came out and everybody panned it, and his whole transmedia empire failed to launch. Which is not just me bringing it up because I take glee in making fun of Max Landis, but because it is so hard to do what happened here. And I think, and I've made this point about the production conditions of the film and everything, but to just produce Star Wars is so interesting to me. And to look at the input, right? Adventure serials, Akira Kurosawa films, mostly samurai work, David Lean's filmmaking in Lawrence of Arabia, Bridge over the River Kwai, things like this. To take all of that as your input and then the output to be Star Wars is just fascinating. And it's evident from the cantina, but even just from the opening of the film, how, to your point from earlier, how inspired the crawl is to just moving the camera one position, and we see the blockade runner, and then we see the Death Star, or not the Death Star, we see a Star Destroyer. It's also immediately iconic, and that is so hard to do. There are so many failed Star Warses. And I just find that to be maybe the most exciting part of all of this, and it all comes back, all of our conversations so far about the imagination, to the imagination, the foresight, the creative ambition, all of that. There's few series that exist like this. I think Avatar is another one. It's interesting to watch Avatar and see James Cameron create. It's interesting to play Halo Combat Evolved and see Bungie at work, right? But Star Wars, on a much bigger scale than either of those, huge franchises, just got it. Star Wars owes everything to this movie. It's not like, this is fine, but it's really Return of the Jedi that the series gets its identity from. This was a misfire, but then, the next movie was so great. It was boom. This is Star Wars. And you know it right from that first sequence in the blockade runner on the Tantive 4, like, yeah, this is something. This Darth Vader guy, this George Lucas guy, there's something here.
The insight to not kill him off in this movie, right? Like, no, we got to save this guy for like, we'll see if there's any sequels, but like, we're not gonna kill him off just yet.
We end so abruptly too. What do you make of the ending? I always find the ending of A New Hope so interesting.
You feel it's abrupt? I don't know. We had like the ceremony, like we won, we destroyed everything. Here's like the award ceremony, and then it just kind of. It feels like it. I don't know. I feel like it kind of ends normal. Although my wife did think it was going to end as soon as they once they were doing like everyone was giving like high fives and cheering, and then so then when like the other scene started, she was kind of getting antsy at this point. So she's like what else is there? I'm like, hold on. I let the award ceremony thing play out. She's like, oh, okay, like, all right, okay. And she saw like Leia changed her hairstyle. She's like, oh wow, like because she said throughout the whole movie, like she's like I don't like it. She's like this Leia character, like she liked Leia, but she just I don't know. She made fun of her hair. And she's like, oh, it's like that hair I always see. Like I always see people make fun of her, like that hair. So at the end, when Leia finally spruces up her hair for like the sword, she's like, oh, she looks really nice there. That was the one takeaway she had at the end of the ceremony. But I was like, I wonder if she'll notice that Chewbacca doesn't get a medal. And like she didn't pay attention to that. But
I've always taken issue with that. Why don't you just give Chewbacca a medal? You can't. It doesn't fit around his neck. I mean, what are we doing here?
It's weird because
hero.
Yeah, it's weird because he walks down with them, but then he just stands there awkwardly. And it's like when someone goes up to the graduation ceremony, and it's like walking away and posing without your diploma. Like it's weird. It is weird. Like everybody's there, and like I don't know, he walks up there like as if he's gonna get something, and he just turns around and just roars.
and then we hit. I think the reason why it feels abrupt to me is he roars, and we're out of there. We're to credits. And we're to credits, of course, with the score of John Williams. I think we must reflect on the score.
Oh my god, yeah.
What do you just take it away? The music and Star Wars.
Oh my god, yes, absolutely. I mean, I remember watching. I don't remember if it was the ILM documentary or the Empire of Stars, one that came with the DVD trilogy. But one of them mentioned about like how none of the stuff like to the actors or whatever like made sense until they saw a cut with the music added, and then it kind of just clicked for them. Like it just clicked for them. Like once they saw the scenes with the score like added to it, like it made sense. I mean. What can you really say other than like when Luke walks out in the evening after like, he gets, and then you see the twins, the binary sunset and the music. Like I still got shivers last night watching that when I was watching for this video. I was like it starts playing. He's just that sense of longing and everything. And just like, it just sends goosebumps and it's hard for me to explain exactly why I feel that, and I think that's kind of part of the magic of it is like that there's not an exact concrete explanation for everything why the music makes you feel a certain way, but like when they're doing the when they're in the cockpits having those World War II style shootouts of the TIE fighters, like let's go baby, let's go, like it's just I think it's like what you mentioned about how like Star Wars has always been present for me. It's like I can't separate in my mind Star Wars away from the music because even the video games, even if they try to do their own thing, there's still like little motifs and like little segments even in the new music, right? Like we played Jedi Survivor earlier this year, and like it has its own original score, but there's still those notes of like like I can picture John Williams like doing this, like this fits that, right? And like just and whenever I don't know, the Imperial March doesn't show up in this one. It doesn't start until I think the Empire Strikes Back. But like, there's just like the foreboding like sense of whenever of like when they would transition to like the Empire and like you see like the ships and everything. But I mean, I'm sorry. Back to the actual music though, like the binary sunset and like the award ceremony at the end, and like and then how that transitions into the at the end, and it's like I don't know, man. I can't when it comes to like other than maybe like the Rocky films, like there's no other like film series for me, and of course Rocky would be in second place anyways, but like there's no other like film series that gets music so well like Star Wars. There's just nothing like it. Like you hear like people who have never seen Star Wars, like my wife like recognized almost all the major themes throughout the movie, like because she hears it in the theme park at Disneyland, but also because she just knows like like, oh yeah, like I've heard this before, like the binary sun's like she's heard, I don't know where, she says she's heard it before somewhere, I don't know where exactly, but like she recognized it. And like most people know, like I for the longest time when I was a teenager, the Imperial March was my ringtone on my phone, and like, and it would be, it always, and then whenever it would go off, I always get the like, you know, from other people and stuff like that. So like Star Wars, I mean, the music is Star Wars, and Star Wars is music. It's just like, I mean, we're not even there yet, but I'm just thinking of Duel of the Fates and you know, all the stuff that comes later on, Across the Stars, like one of my favorite like pieces of Star Wars. Like, I don't know what more I could say, bro. I don't know.
It's, I have no understanding of music, unlike a fundamental level of how music is made or why something sounds good or why it doesn't. All I have are my ears and my heart. And they tell me the same story, and it's the same story that you're expressing here. It is just so... It's so impossible to conceptualize, as you're saying, a Star Wars that does not have these cues. And it's interesting to think about this as a film, and then to imagine the conscious choice to have it be so heavily and so prevalently scored. I mean, the score is playing constantly in the film. And it is it's always foregrounded, and it's become so iconic. It's very clear, as you're giving the anecdote about the cast and crew realizing when they hear, you know, the music and setting context to scenes and everything. It's so obvious that everybody knew, okay, yeah, we're under no illusions the music is anything short of an essential to the experience. And it's foregrounded because it really does a great job of telling us how to feel and encapsulating everything that this first movie is, in its sense of wonder, in its sense of foreboding, in its sense of obviously adventure, but also its sense of playfulness. This is a really, really playful movie. And that's another thing I really want to ask you about. There are so many laugh out loud moments here, and I think that's great. You know, people say, which I think is fair of some moments of especially Last Jedi, like, oh, you know, the influence of Marvel made the Disney show, the Disney era Star Wars more quippy or whatever. And that is true, but I think that Marvel is only as quippy and as humorous as it is because Star Wars did it first. I think that this set such an interesting and repeatable tenor for blockbusters of the importance of the laugh there. And we must not forget that this is right up there with Jaws and with Godfather Part 1 as being considered to be one of the trinity that established the modern American blockbuster. So much DNA that we talk about now comes from this. And I always think about, and I'm curious for some of your favorite humorous moments, your thoughts on the tone overall. I'm curious about that, but I always go back to my favorite of, we're on the Death Star, and there's a couple of stormtroopers approaching us as we've gotten into the trash compactor. Han turns around and shoots one. They start running away, so Han starts running after them, just yelling like a war cry. And then it's blocked so perfectly, it's edited so perfectly. He turns the corner, and the camera cuts, and there are more stormtroopers we could possibly count. And he's just on his foot. And then we go to Chewbacca's perspective, and we just see like blaster scoring on the opposite wall, and you hear his footsteps, and now he's running, then Chewbacca sees, and they're fucking turning around, and we're hitching it in the other direction. It's such good comedic filmmaking. I think we can never forget that Star Wars is funny.
It is. One of the early scenes that made my wife laugh, and I keep referring to her, but it's fun watching Star Wars through the lens of somebody else. That's why. But one of the moments that made her laugh was when they turn off the trash compactor and you hear Luke and Leia and they're all cheering, and he's like, oh, and then C-3PO's like, oh my god, we were too late, like there's our dying whales. And like it does, because you just hear like shouts, and like you can't make out if it's cheers of joy or like they're shouting because like they're being crushed alive. So the part where C-3PO thinks they failed, like she kind of found that she chuckled at that scene. I'm trying to think if there's any other really funny ones other than that. I mean, I think of some, but those come in later movies, like the Return of the Jedi, where my favorite one is where where Han's like he's like I can't see like everything's like he's like and Luke's like, oh, there's not much to see, it's just desert, like I grew up here, and he's like, oh, you're gonna die here, like convenient, huh? Like,
Yeah.
I love that, like we were talking about quips. I'm like Han Solo is like the quip man, he's like, the I know and all that, and the this was a boring conversation. We're all fine here. We're all doing good. How are you? Who is this? What's your operating number? And I'm going to send a squad. It's like, oh no, there's a radiation leak. We're gonna take care. And he just shoots like, he's like, boring conversation. Anyway, like
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite ones from A New Hope. I think that is the funniest moment for me from A New Hope. And then my wife, she just likes whenever anyone's rude to C-3PO, she finds it funny. Or whenever C-3PO is rude to R2-D2, she just finds it. He's like when he said like, no, I don't think he likes you. Like, no, I don't like you either. She gets like that's supposed to be the slapstick comedy duo. So
the sort of old married couple relationship between C-3PO
little Fred and Ethel there.
I love that. The one they got a good laugh out of my dad, and I also agree it's so funny, is when Leia calls Chewbacca a walking carpet.
Walking carpet.
I think that Chewbacca is another fascinating character in this whole ensemble, because he and R2-D2, they might as well be nonverbal characters, because we have no fucking clue what they're saying. I don't speak Shriwook. I wish I did. I don't.
Oh.
But one of my favorite things I learned from playing KOTOR is that his language is called Shriwook.
Okay, I forgot about it. That sounds right, but I forgot about it, yeah.
But it really exemplifies, again, the very classical influences on this film, that there's a lot of, like you're saying, as you're aptly pointing out, silent era, slapstick acting and blocking in like scene composition in the movie. I love that Chewbacca can't talk, but I love the let the Wookiee win, and that's become iconic, and it's one of many very iconic.
He kind of just like does this like little.
He does which is really great. I mean,
it's C-3PO's face too. Like C-3PO has like the perfect face for getting emotion across without really changing, because he always like. It's almost like his face changes with his tone, but it's like the most neutral expression he has, and he's like. And he turns to R2, he's like, I think you should let the Wookiee win. Like, they're just like this, like the body language of like it's just very like erratic. Like, it's just like it comes through. Like, it's like part of like that comedic timing is like his tone almost changes the expression, where like he looks like worried, but also like that face of his just gets across so many different emotions, and it's really just on how he gestures and like speaks that changes it.
I also love, which is, of course, infamous, but they also, through sound editing, amplify it in the cut, which I love. The stormtrooper hitting his head on the doorway when he walks through. That's really good, too.
They added the thunk, yeah.
It's also interesting. I always think about when we get attacked by the Tusken Raiders in the desert. We go back to Obi-Wan's hovel, and then, Luke, I can't go with you, I'll take you as far as Anchorhead, right? Mm-hmm. But we end up at the Sandcrawler, and there's the remark of, oh, these shots are too precise to be sand people. It can only be done by the stormtroopers, and they march in two lines and everything. It's like, it's funny that is not only the complete antithesis to the cultural understanding of the aim of a stormtrooper, but even the antithesis to the whole Death Star sequence, where they fucking are missing constantly.
Everything.
They miss constantly, and which is, of course, it must happen, because if Luke gets shot, well, we've got no Star Wars. But I think it's interesting how, again, they're very clearly like in an ad hoc fashion building up the mythos of the universe, but then also kind of forgetting about this and making other decisions in the context of the same film. I love trying to piece all that together and see what doesn't quite line up, what does, what doesn't. I'm curious about the character of Luke Skywalker. Luke is very interesting because, as the Disney Plus blurb says, he's a farm boy. He is the everyman. He's a very common person, but he's also very uncommon, obviously, in his skill sets and his abilities. And he's also so hesitant to leave home. Not because he doesn't want to, but because he feels a responsibility to Uncle Ben and to sorry, not Uncle Ben. Sorry,
Aunt Beru.
Uncle Owen. I got Spider-Man on the mind.
Oh.
Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. I tripped myself up. But the switch that's flipped when he comes home and sees their skeletons is interesting, because in one way I think the internalization there of that anger is kind of an interesting notion for his journey as a Jedi later on down the line, and like his catalyzing his hate of the Empire. But it is also very quick.
It is, because
very quick. What do you think about? Yeah, what do you make about him?
The line delivery when he comes back and he tells Owen, like, I'm gonna go with you. I'm gonna learn the ways of the Jedi. I'm gonna be a Jedi like my father. Like whoa, like that was a very sudden, with so much conviction so quickly. Yeah. Like just kind of like haphazardly, you kind of just like he just like signed a contract or something and just submitted himself to this thing that he's like, I'm gonna see it through. And like oh, like so much conviction so quickly. Like that part has always stuck out to me as kind of very forced. Yeah. Very kind of unnatural. Just I don't know if it's the delivery or just the ways the words, everything he says. It's just like it's kind of a lot. It's a lot to pack into one sentence. Like I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go with you to Alderaan, or I forgot what he says exactly, but just I'm leaving. I want to become a Jedi just like my father, who I just learned about like not even a whole day ago, and just like it's a very quick turnaround. But I get it. We have things to do. We got to go see places. So like it is very. I think it's kind of jarring.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the impact of the cut of cutting down, but I believe the original cut, off the top of my head, I want to say it was like 4+ hours that was cut down to 2 hours. I might be wrong about that number, but it is interesting. I took a pause break to pop some popcorn about halfway through the movie. The structure of A New Hope is interesting in that we basically spend the entire second half on the Death Star. Or destroying the Death Star. We're on Yavin for like 2 minutes. We're on Yavin lining up to a briefing, and we're back up in the sky to fight. So it really is Tatooine, obviously cutting back and forth the Death Star, but Tatooine, Death Star, and it's an interesting framework that Star Wars ends up largely following of Hoth. And then a little bit Dagobah, but then Bespin. But then really in Return of the Jedi, it's spending some time on Tatooine again. Then we're on Endor.
Yeah.
I just think it's a very interesting structure, and I think part of the potential to get bored, which I think is definitely there in A New Hope, even though I don't feel it because, of course, I love this movie so much.
Right.
I think it is down to that. It's a very interesting structure. Because it is, again, a very traditional 3-act film in a lot of ways. First act ends with the character crisis, Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen killed, so okay. Propels us into second act, third act begins as we realize, oh shit, we got the plans, we're out of here, time to blow up the Death Star, make that happen. But it's interesting because on top of that very simple 3-act structure is this weird, like, 50-50 split. What do you think about that and all that time we spent on the Death Star?
I didn't realize. I'm glad you pointed this out because I didn't realize how much of the movie is spent on Tatooine until, again, my wife asked me to pause it because she had to go to the restroom, when she asked me to pause it, I think they were boarding the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
Again, she's like, "Oh, it's that ship from Galaxy's Edge." I'm like, "Yep." It's the one from Galaxy's Edge, the same one, the replica of, and I think it was about halfway through, like the little red bar on the bottom, whatever. I think it was like about halfway through or whatever, and I'm like, has it? Like what? Like is it really only like halfway through the movie when they finally leave Tatooine? Like I don't know why in my head I felt just when I was younger, I felt like maybe a third of the movie was like on Tatooine, and like the middle third was like the Death Star rescue. And then, like, the last third was, Yavin and the trench run. And I'm like, that's so weird to me because it doesn't feel like it's that long when you're going through that. And I'm like, that's good in a way because, I mean, that means that it's not like a boring. It doesn't feel like, oh, like, let's get off Tatooine already. It's like, it was kind of jarring. I'm like, I never noticed it's about halfway through. So, I mean, I think it's interesting that you point that out. Like it's one of those things I always subconsciously knew but never paid attention to, is that, like, for example, I love the prequels because I feel like the prequels are way more lived in. And it's like, I'm thinking about the prequels. I'm like, oh yeah, like episode 1, we see Tatooine, we see Naboo, and we see Coruscant. Like we see 3 different planets. And then, we see Camino, we see Coruscant, and we see Geonosis, and like the other ones. And I mean, that's why those movies always felt like much more like lived in, because you're going to all these different locales. You have Utapau, Mustafar, Coruscant, and the sky battle above Coruscant, and it always felt like lived in. So like, yeah, I never felt that I never felt like the original trilogy felt, like you said, it never felt boring. But I think I was always kind of conscious that we spent a lot on Tatooine, and especially now in the Disney Plus era, like there's a lot of Tatooine,
Yeah.
a lot of Tatooine. But coming back to Tatooine and A New Hope, I wasn't kind of like, ugh, like here we go again with Tatooine, because it's the first one, it's the original, right? So it's like no, like this is where we establish the trend of going to Tatooine, really. So I didn't notice it that much. It didn't feel boring to me. Like you said, it doesn't feel boring, but it is weird how our perception of time is kind of skewed, where you think like it's this amount of time, and then you pay attention to the runtime, you're like, oh, like I was kind of off. Like that's not at all how it is. And I think that just kind of lends itself to the strength of the film, where like we have a lot going on. So it doesn't, there's not that much time, like load time to like where it gets bogged down. I think that for me, the longest section, and I mentioned this earlier, was when there was like no dialogue, was just R2 in the canyon and
Yeah.
C-3PO running around. And when there's just no dialogue, I think that's when it does feel kind of like long. But once we get to the humans, once we get to Ben, and once we get to Obi-Wan and everybody, like I feel like the pace kind of picks up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'd agree. I also think, I mean, but by the time you might start to feel some fatigue of the runtime, we're into the trench run, and the trench run, I mean, it's just dynamite, right?
Yes.
I mean, the trench run is so great because they do a really interesting job of setting the stakes so extremely high, they're almost incomprehensible. We're about to blow up the planet that has the character we just rescued. She is going to die. The rebellion's going to die. It's all over. We know from yeah.
I was going to say stakes so high, bro, that we will repeat them a couple more times
Yeah.
throughout the series.
We know from the Alderaan demonstration that this is nothing to joke around about. We're got our characters in harm's way. They've got fleets, and they've got detachments of TIE fighters ready to rock. They've got turbo lasers all over the place. This is an insurmountable challenge. So it feels so big, but the stakes are also so personal because of Biggs, because we got Luke in the cockpit, because we have this sort of very obviously set up for a very obvious payoff, but the effective payoff of Han returning to shoot down Vader's tie, or shoot Vader's tie off course, so Luke can take his shot. The failed proton torpedo into the exhaust. It's such a masterclass in making a set piece feel so globally like just impossible to imagine, but so like personally affecting. For you, why is the trench run so good?
I mean, it just goes back to I think, like you said, it's like the stakes are set up, but it's so like video gamey in a way, where it's like we have this massive boss, and here's like the one weak spot kind of thing, and it's just kind of, I mean, there's just something very video gamey about it. And like as a kid, like I mentioned earlier, like I would pretend to do I would do the Star Wars, like the Death Star trench run, like in the grocery store down the aisles with pushing the cart, and like the aisles, the shelves and stuff were kind of like the on the side and stuff, and just like, and then they kind of make it very video gamey, with like the little targeting computer and like the little countdown. So like, okay, like this is where we're going. This is how much we have left to go. This is where the target is, and like it's not like time based, but it's just in space. But it kind of works like time based in a way, right? So like it just feels very much set. Like I guess again, this kind of reminds me, just to go off topic real quick, is like a Top Gun Maverick, where it's a very similar situation where like to the audience, it's very clear what they have to do. They have to break this thing open, get one shot in, and then they're cleared and go home, right? So it's just very simple, like for the audience to follow. Like you have these turbo lasers with like the recoiling like shots and everything, and it just looks so cool. There's the towers with the recoiling shots, and then like the explanation, like, oh, like their snub fighters are too small for our cannons. Like, all right, we gotta go fly out there and meet them in the battlefield. Like it's just so cool. Like you two, like you're coming with me, and the guys are already dressed up for the flight suits and everything.
Yeah.
Like let's go, baby. Like we're gonna go, and like you just like, and then like lock S foils into attack positions, like the wings spread out. It just visually there's so much going on that's just like it doesn't allow you time to get bored. I feel like there's always something going on, whether it's those cannons, the TIE fighters screeching in, and the I like how Vader won't fire until it's right in center. like it's just drips to the side maybe. No, you have to wait for it to be right in the set. Like it's just doing like it's very video gamey, and I think that's kind of like it, especially for me as a kid. Like it appealed to all those like senses of what I enjoy about like it's a very gamified way of doing a third act. I think where like and then like, we scan, like, sir, like we've analyzed their patterns. Like there is a weakness. Like you want to prepare. It's like what? Evacuate in our moment of triumph. Like you overestimate their chance. Like it's like the cockiness, right? The cockiness juxtaposed with these scrappy rebel fighters. Like it's just a perfect recipe for like I think for just a very climatic third act. And like you mentioned, Han coming in like. Coming at the last second, like, whoo, like you're clear, kid. Let's blow this thing and go home. Like, it's just very hype. It's just a lot of hype, a lot of visuals, and it just works really well together.
The moment you're talking about of Vader going to his tie with his two pilots, I love that scene because it so subtly shows the hubris of the Empire. They're all just they walk so calmly to the hangar. There's no like, oh urgency. Shit, we're in real big trouble here. We gotta. And I also love, too, the sequence of editing of Tarkin ready to fire, the Death Star exploding. There's no moment... they don't give him the moment of, oh, no.
Yeah.
I love that he takes his confidence right to the grave. I think that's so cool. I love that whole sequence. And the dialogue is great, too, because they really set the stakes for dialogue so well of the panic as the rebel pilots are calling back and forth. You got a tie on your tail, right? I can't shake them. All of this stuff. It's really effective.
Like Luke, why'd you turn off your targeting computer?
Biggs, where are you? Because he's being the little shot he takes. I love that we keep cutting back to R2 to seeing R2 like trying to repair and like make little repairs in the moment. I love that, but. The point about the targeting computer actually brings me to the last thing I really wanted to discuss in our discussion here, which is the spiritualism of this movie. I love. And I'm just curious what you make of it. The trusting the Force, the notion of the hokey religion or the blaster at your side. I think all of this is really key to why this movie is so mystical and like imagination grabbing.
I love that you mentioned that because that was one of the things I forgot that because my wife at the end she was saying like she's like they keep saying a religion, like calling it a religion, and I was like she's like I'm like it's kind of hard to because I'm like you have to watch more of the movies. So I keep trying to tell her like you have to watch the rest for a lot of the stuff to click. But like they keep referring to like it's because like there's only at the height of the Jedi, right? There's like a couple thousand, right? In a galaxy of trillions of species of people, like the Jedi, like not like the Jedi are known. But they're like maybe they're exaggerated in their abilities. Maybe they're like like they're kind of like with the thing with the micro series with could Windu really do that? I don't know, but there's a story of him doing that apparently, right? Pulling all the nuts and bolts and using them as shrapnel and all that. Like I don't know, can you punch? I don't know, right? So you have to imagine like these are stories that are told to like all these people, right? So I kind of summarize it for her as like there's not that many Jedi. People don't understand the Force. There's like different religions surrounding the Force. Like I didn't go into detail about like the Night Sisters and all that, but I was like to a lot of people like the Force is just like it's like doing like a card trick or something. Like they think that's like the extent of it. And so like this notion of like I love how they refer to Vader. They tell him you're like you're the last you're the last surviving member of that religion or whatever of your old your sorceress ways, right? They don't even understand it as a religion. To them it's almost like smoke and mirrors. Like you're like you and your sorceress ways, right? So like he's some kind of grand vizier or something like that with like a what I mean like he's just like everything he does is just smoke and mirrors to them kind of until like the choke is very real to that guy, right? But like the religion Han, it's like hey, I've been from one side of this galaxy to another. I've seen a lot of weird things but nothing that makes me believe in one whole encompassing energy controls my destiny. Like right, it's like the very cowboy, very confident stuff. So like, so the notion of like the Force being like this, or the Jedi, I guess in general, right? They're like this religion, when like, and it's like how you think of religion in real life. Like, for example, like Obi-Wan, like if you strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you'll ever dream of, right? And it's like there's some like, for me, as someone who's has a very strong connection with Christianity and like the Bible and stuff, like it's almost like a Jesus metaphor, right? Like Jesus dies at the cross, or at the stake or the cross, and then he now becomes this like spiritual being to all his followers afterwards, right? Like the legend of him grows and becomes this big thing, right? Where like Obi-Wan, like it's the same thing, right? Like, if you strike me down, like Vader doesn't understand that, he doesn't comprehend that, he just thinks, I'm just killing this old man and I'm done, like that'll be it. And then Obi-Wan becomes this, like, he guides Luke from beyond, like, from beyond the grave, so to speak. And he, gives him exposition, explains everything later on, Return of the Jedi, and all that stuff, right? But, like, yeah, this notion of the Force as, like, as this thing that people kind of hear about, but they don't really pay attention to. It's kind of like how you or I might view people who do, like, tarot readings, or, people who do witchcraft, or, like, I'm like, do I believe that? Like, I don't know. I don't know if witchcraft is real, but there's people who believe it and they think it works. Like, okay, well, that's your thing, right? That's your thing, right? So that's kind of how like the Force is to like people like Han, or to a certain species, like to other people in Star Wars. So that's kind of like how I've always seen as the hokey religion and all that in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on the money, and I think you can approach it from that angle, but you can also look at it from the angle of genre, which is really interesting. You're totally right, Han is the archetypal cowboy, and then being put in the same scene as the wizard, because Star Wars is, of course, a fusion of sci-fi and fantasy. It doesn't fit neatly really into either, and of course the Western is also important. Star Wars as a space Western is a long held sort of shorthand for it, because it takes a lot from the Western, not only in terms of setting and in terms of iconography in some ways, but also frankly that slow pace on Tatooine is very much of the Western genre. Like it's such a melding, and so I think the skepticism that the characters have for the Force is kind of an interesting like reflection of the skepticism of Star Wars as this big like cultural product of all of these genres and these traditions and themes all put together. So I think that there's a tendency to like talk about big blockbusters like this as really not being about much. Like they're about the plot, they're about the characters. They don't go much beneath that. And I think you can make a case for Star Wars being that in some ways, in that if you look at it like in an academic lens, Star Wars is very safe. It operates with a lot of very like established tropes of good versus evil, and that being conveyed with really no moral ambiguity, and with like filmic color theory of Vader dresses in black and Luke dresses in white. And it is again, going back to this as a sort of at the inception point of blockbusters, it is a 4-quadrant blockbuster. It appeals, you've got characters and scenarios that appeal to men and appeal to women, to young, to old. And so if you approach Star Wars as this cultural product that is inherently for everybody, I think that the fact that the characters in the universe have to reckon with the Force and with all the genres and with this potential religious implication and everything, I think there is a little bit more going on under the surface than people might let on. And I think it is in a film about destiny, it is also kind of an affirmation of finding your own path. Leia even says that Han must go off and find his own path, and his path brings
no one.
Yeah,
she says no one can choose it for him. Yeah, she says that. Yeah,
and his path brings back to the rebellion, but he still made those choices, and Luke was forced into his somewhat, and that's where the destiny comes in. But I think you can play a self-determination against destiny, and religion against like secular thought and all this stuff in Star Wars. And obviously, and George Lucas has said this, much to the chagrin of many like frankly anti-woke, weird Star Wars fans online, this is an allegory, right? This is, and then it becomes even more obvious in Return of the Jedi. That we're talking about the Vietnam War. We're under no, under no, assuasions that that's not the case. So I really think that Star Wars, while on the surface, in an academic context, it does look very safe and very traditional, and because it is, I think it operates with all these deeper levels that I really love. I just really, really love this movie. I just totally love it. There's nothing to say about it other than that. I just love it.
I do too. I love A New Hope. I love how, and just going back real quick to the Force, I love the where the characters kind of meet each other in the middle for some of the things. Like, for example, where Luke is storming off from Han, he's like, "Oh, all he cares about yourself," or whatever. He's like, "Luke," and he stops in, like he kind of gives in, he kind of humors him. He says, like, "May the Force be with you." And it's like, we know Han's not a big Force believer, right? Like, he's not really into it, but like, just kind of like the like it's just like a phrase, right? It's just a phrase, but he kind of means it in like I support you. It's almost like code for like I support you or something like that, or like, hey, like we're not on bad terms, but it's like it's more than just the phrase itself, because he obviously doesn't really see much about the Force, but it's kind of like he humors him in a way. Yeah. And I kind of like that. I like how I like the, like where he's like, "Oh, what do you think about her?" He's like, "Oh, I try not to." He's like, "Good." And then like when they rescue her, and he's like, and then like Han, like he kind of catches on, like Luke's got feelings for her, and he's like, "Hey, do you ever think like a guy and me?" And like, no. And then like Han's he's not like upset. He has like this smirk, kind of like he knows he kind of got under his skin, right? Like, I love like these interactions and like just those moments where there's nothing going on, but they're just like just the dialogue, just talking, and they're just kind of like feeling each other out, like we kind of get the like, okay, like there you go, like that's Han's character right there. He's kind of like, he likes to poke the bear every once in a while. He likes to kind of just, he likes to like see where he is with other people, and just like the Leia, like you said, like she's very like, oh, like, it's like, oh, you can even think of a better plan to get us out of here. Like, you kind of like, we're like at the end of this like, she doesn't say in these words, so to speak, but like when they have to go into the, like, in you go to the trash can, and just like how she takes like, she's like, I don't care who you guys are. She's like, from now on, you're gonna do as I say. And then Han's like, I don't take, I love how it's not just instantly like generic, like, oh, like, yes, oh, you say, you know what I mean? It's very like thought out, fleshed out characters who are they have like their set personalities. Like you said, like, get this walking carpet out of my way, and like she's just very like, because I feel like we didn't talk that much about Leia, but just like her character and who she is, like, like when she's like, oh, it's obvious, like, let us get away, like that's why, like she's not just whatever she appears on the surface. Like, there's more, like she understands. She's like some, and I mean, some of that's expanded in some of the other media stuff, Leia, and Star Wars and stuff. But like, she's like the level-headed, like kind of almost like to a fault. She's prickly, right? She's prickly. Yeah. She rubs people and stuff, and I just find how Luke's like kind of the starry-eyed, kind of like wow, and then Han's kind of just like. Like they don't mix well, and that's what makes them later on so great, that there's a lot of friction there, but it's also a lot of playful friction. Like later on, they kind of just, and I don't want to get into the other stuff because we're not there yet. But just I just like you said, I love A New Hope. I love how it establishes these characters. Like you're saying, the Fred and Ethel of R2 and C-3PO, and there's like really, I mean, other than side characters we don't really know about, but like I think. If you don't, you can tell, like you were talking about earlier about how the cut of the film, like you can tell we're supposed to know who Biggs was from earlier in the film, because that scene's cut out. When he reunites with Luke again, and it's like, hey, and it's like, to the audience, it's like, who's this guy? Like, we don't know, but like we get the idea they know each other, but like, oh, like that scene they cut out from, several scenes they cut out from earlier would have made more sense for us, kind of stuff. Like it's not a perfect film, but I love A New Hope. I love also when they're doing the debriefing for this Death Star, and then the guy at the commander even says like, may the Force be with you. And I'm just kind of like who amongst the pilots does he know are like Jedi, or like even like believe in the Force? So I just like how it's like kind of a catch-all, kind of like, may God be with you, sort of, in a way. I don't know. I love A New Hope.
I do too, and I mean we covered so much fantastic ground here. I think the last thing I would say, just as we wrap up, is that a YouTuber, Drew Gooden, put out a video recently, which I've yet to watch, but I've seen clips of it going around Twitter, called "How Much More Star Wars Do We Need?" And
all of it.
Yeah. We're on the same page. He takes a very cynical look at Star Wars as a franchise, like the franchise like a snake eating its own tail. Like it's just
Ouroboros.
yeah, it's just so it's so cyclical and it's trapped in that. And I think that that's true in part. I think that's been the case for a while, but when you go back to A New Hope and you realize how many questions are asked, how many questions the movie asks, I think that it's only natural that you'd want to answer them. And I almost think that if A New Hope is the question, all the media around it becomes the answer. And in some ways, that's the detriment of what comes later, which I can see. I can see why people take that issue and why I do take that issue with a lot of Star Wars media. But reconnecting to A New Hope just reminds me of the fact that this is just a world that makes you inquisitive and makes you want to know more and makes you want to understand what's around the corner and to think and imagine. And so the impulse for modern Star Wars to tell us these things and to give us more, and obviously more questions are asked by Empire and by Jedi and by the prequels, I think, too, and the sequels to a lesser extent, much lesser extent. But yeah, I think Star Wars is in a weird place. It's definitely a different place than when it began. But I think that when you work from this creative of a square one, Star Wars being derivative, you're being derivative of something so extremely creative that it's still exciting. You know, it's not, you know, like Wonka, or there's so many prequels and things like, do I really need to know the answer of how Willy became Wonka? There's a whole bit on BLB about this recently. I do, but I like Timothée Chalamet. That's a sidebar.
Okay.
But it's something that I have a hard time wrestling with, because whenever we talk about a new Star Wars project, I'm like, oh, but R5D4 is back, or but Luke has to come in to rescue at the end of Mando season 2 or whatever. It's because these things happen because we love these characters. And Star Wars has room to do more and to have another New Hope that takes us somewhere totally different and things look different and starts to ask questions again. And I hope Star Wars returns to that point. But I'm also, ultimately, you have the refrain of, I'd rather bad Star Wars than no Star Wars. I think what New Hope helps me realize is that my refrain is, this stuff is so amazing that I'd rather have the answers. I'd rather we went down these avenues and we learned about these characters and these situations and scenarios and everything. Not that because I want the mystery to go away, but because the mystery is so strong, I want to know more. It's a paradoxical place the franchise is in, and I think it's something they've never been able to answer. And I know that I'm being very contradictory in and of myself, but
yeah,
I think that there's something so potent about how this film ignites your curiosity, and it's no wonder why Dave Filoni wants to just make more of this.
Yeah. I think certain lines from A New Hope, like, I mean, you made the obvious one of the Clone Wars, right? Being like, You find the Clone Wars? It's like, oh shoot, what's the Clone Wars? I need to find out, right? But just like, for example, like, we don't even see the Emperor, but we have that line from Tarkin. We're like, oh, I just talked to the Emperor. Like, he just dissolved the Imperial Senate. And it's like, well, how are we going to keep the systems in line? It's like, fear. Well, right? It's like, wait, there's an Emperor? Like, of course there's an Emperor, right? But like, wait, who's the Emperor? Like,
right.
Like, what's his story, right? What's his story? Like, the Imperial Senate, like, I mean, for me, like, the political stuff is interesting. It's like, yeah, like, how are you going to keep this in line when you get rid of the entire governing body? Like, how's that going to work? And it's like, oh, well, fear. And it's like, okay, well, what happens once you blow up the Death Star? What comes next, right? Like, now there's not that fear. What happens next, right? And of course, we get those answers later on, like another Death Star. And so, like, you're right. There is a lot of things that it kind of that you want to poke. Like I said, like, my wife asked, like, well, what happened to that guy's face? And I'm like, I don't know what happened to his face. And it's like, I mean, you could run around in your head with all these different ideas, but like, I imagine there's a story out there somewhere in Star Wars maybe that answers that question.
He's a serial killer. There's the answer.
And we kind of get that right in Rogue One.
Yeah.
We're like, right? They show up and they're like escaping from Jeddah and all of that to show up in Tatooine, right? So like, it is funny how and you're right. Like, we don't really need answers for everything. I mean, like, do we need to know how Luke gets that toy shuttle? Not really, but Kenobi gives us an answer of how he gets that toy shuttle, right? Do we need to know, like, who trained Obi-Wan before? I'm like, I kind of want to know that, right? We get that with Qui-Gon, and then, who trained Qui-Gon, and so on, so on forth. So, like, there are certain things, right? I can understand when people are kind of jaded. Like, do we need to know, like, the infamous, was it Glup Shido or Glup Shit, whatever? Like,
Glup
right?
Shido, yes.
That's what spawns from having too much, right? Too many answers.
Yeah.
But like you said,
Gungi. We gotta know about Gungi.
But like you said, like Star Wars is such a rich playground for for these storytelling. And like, I think I mentioned this to you before, but I remember when they first started doing like the book stuff, like beyond not just the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but I'm like stuff like in the 90s when like George would tell like the writers, like, you can do whatever you want, just don't go into like, before A New Hope, right? Because he was laying the groundwork for, for the prequels and stuff. But there's a quote, I can't remember which book I saw this. There's a quote from him where he says something about how he meant Star Wars to be like a what do you call it, a sandbox sort of.
Yeah.
Where like I told my story and now hopefully people after me will continue to tell their stories in like the sandbox that I created. And I know it's a quote somewhere in one of the books, but like that is what Star Wars is. It's kind of like, it's, to me, it's not meta, but it's kind of like what the metaverse and kind of stuff is before that stuff existed, before you had these crossovers and all that stuff. Like, Star Wars was that for writers, where they can expand and introduce like Mara Jade or Thrawn or like all these other characters, right? Like Star Wars is so, it's literally a galaxy, right? It's a galaxy. And now it's like, we're going beyond just a galaxy now with the most recent media.
Two galaxies.
It's ripe and rich for just telling what kind of story you want. You can have a horror story in Star Wars, and there is. You can have a romance story, and there is. Like, anything like you can tell in Star Wars like fits because of how varied. There's all these planets, all these creatures. Like, you have nothing. Almost nothing is too weird for Star Wars. There's even a time travel. There's actually a time travel story, which is actually kind of cool in a way. It doesn't mess with like the original characters or anything at all. It's like a separate thing, but there's like so much you can do with Star Wars, and to think that A New Hope, like this 1977 film, like you said, it's like set on a desert planet, and like just to think it just kickstarts off all that. It's just like it's crazy to think. It's really cool. It's just really cool.
I think that's a perfect point to end on, Andrew. Or, well, I should say the second most perfect point, because you must say it for me.
May the Force be with you.
There we go. That's the perfect ending.